This meeting is being recorded.
Okay.
Yeah, mama.
Hi, everyone. I'm Siddharth. I'm one of the community leads at Gifted World. We are, go to my slides. Yep. So we are a collaboration between the Center for Talent Development at Northwestern University, educational initiatives that runs has created the asset diagnostic tests, and GenWise. What we do is we're a community for learners who are curious, who really want to test the boundaries of their learning and feel challenged. Now, why is this important? So if you're really curious about something, if you're really interested in something, you tend to be operating above your grade level, right? And when you're doing that, it's often difficult to find peers and mentors who are able to work with you in a way that challenges you. So at GenWise and Gifted World, we have over a decade of enabling talented students to reach their full potential. And we're the only such platform in India and the UAE that does this. Okay, sorry. Yeah. We work a lot with students who are medalists in the asset talent search because many of them get recognized by the asset talent search, and we provide access to amazing mentors who enable these students to really shine. Now, I'll give you a quick example of what I mean by enabling a student to shine. So and I know many of you relate to this, right? You're really curious about something, you really want to learn stuff, and you're very good at it. It's like you're giving a great serve in a game of tennis. But if on the other side of the court, the person's not able to hit the ball back, then you're just sad because nobody's playing with you. However, if you give a great serve, and on the other side, there's someone who's good enough to hit it back at you, and they're good enough to hit it back at you such that you start a rally. You start hitting the ball back and forth and back and forth, right? Then you're really happy. Then you feel motivated to learn more, to challenge yourself and to achieve. Finding the right kind of mentor, a person on the other side, or friend, a person on the other side of the court who won't just smash the ball back at you in a way that you can't hit it, but will slowly build up your capacity to grow. That's what we're here for. And we have incredible mentors like Krithika, who come here for the joy of learning and working with students. You can see on our website everything that's upcoming. We have a really lovely summer program coming up in July, aimed at folks who are having holidays in July, but also possible for students who are in school at that time. We have a range of courses that are focused on curiosity and learning through curiosity. We also have a WhatsApp group where we post challenges regularly. And we have a parent community where just yesterday, in fact, we had a group of parents who were really sharing about how do we enable and nurture our children well. So we want all of you to be a part of this community, to be learning together with us, and we're very glad to have you here. So with that, I'd like to move to today's session. So this is one of our Gifted World Masterclasses. We host these 2 to 3 times a month. And if you're on our mailing list, you'll get the information about it. I'm very excited today to introduce Krithika Mohan. So Dr. Krithika Mohan did her schooling at Kumarans in Bangalore. And she graduated at around the same time that I did, because we both went to college together at the Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research in Pune. Okay, so I met Krithika about 17 years ago, right? At that time, we were both undergrads, and we both connected because there were only 4 of us from Bangalore in total. And so Krithika has been interested in neuroscience and the brain from the very start, right? She was one of the few people in our batch of undergraduates who actually went to the same mentor. She did. So when we were at ICER, we were doing a summer project every year. And she did her summer project every year with the same person. Finally did her 1-year master's thesis project with the same person, studying vision. Okay. I am proud to have contributed to her master's project. I earned 1 Tetra Pak of Fruity for sitting and staring at a computer screen and pressing left and right buttons when I saw images. Right? Since then, she has moved on to better and more qualified experimental subjects. She spent her PhD at the University of Chicago studying monkeys and how they make decisions, right? So monkeys are definitely a step up from underpaid undergraduates. But strangely enough, I think she's still giving the monkeys mango juice. Okay, so nothing much changes, whether it's a human drinking mango juice to perform task or monkey drinking mango juice to perform task, it's just juice. Anyway, she finished her PhD and then went on to do her research at the California Institute of Technology and currently the University of California in Berkeley, where she does brain surgery on monkeys. Like, wow. Okay, so it's super cool. She's a really fun person. And I'm very excited that all of you get to interact with her. We've got a really interactive session today. There are a couple of quizzes. Stay sharp. Okay. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, we're keeping track of the questions and comments there, and you'll be able to answer all the polls that we're putting up on YouTube as well. So without further ado, I hope I've embarrassed Krithika sufficiently that she is now ready to talk to all of you.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Siddharth. I can only hope to return the favor back to you in the next hour and a half. All right. No, that was awesome. Thanks for the introduction. GenWise sounds like a really cool program. And I'm excited to hopefully spark everyone's curiosity and, talk about the brain. I think the brain is the most interesting thing in the universe that we still don't understand. The universe is very interesting, of course. And the hardest thing to understand is what makes us tick, what makes you tick, what makes your mother tick, and what makes your father tick, and how do we make decisions? How do we think? And how do we just represent the world that we see every day? All right. So I think I'm going to get started. We'll have questions in between that Siddharth is going to take care of. So I'm going to, hand it off to him whenever we can, whenever we need to. I have a bunch of slides. The goal for the whole class is to make sure I do not get through all my slides. Okay, if I get through all my slides, we failed. And I want as many questions as possible whenever you feel like it. If you don't understand something, please let me know. And we're here for a good time and good conversation. And Siddharth, stop me if I'm fast, if I said a word that doesn't make sense, and if you want more clarification, anything. Okay, so you're like my liaison.
Yes, we're keeping track of the chat. So if you need to say anything, just message us personally in the chat.
Perfect. All right, can you see my slides?
Yes, we're all good.
Awesome. All right. So today I'm going to talk to you about vision and memory. And every time, I'm sorry. Oops. Okay, let's try this again. Okay. All right. So I'm going to tell you about vision and memory. And every time I think about memory, I remember this passage that I read a very long time ago. Maybe some of you have read it, from Aladdin and the Magic Lamp. I've highlighted the passage here. Well then, genie, the princess said, I command you to erase all memory of us from the old man's mind. Erase all memory of the lamp, of the treasure, and of you, and erase all memory of sorcery and magic. When he wakes up, let him be just a simple man with a simple past that never happened. Yes, mistress, the genie said, it is already done. Don't you wish that, we could at will erase some memories and just erase some memories, some bad memories that we've had, and amplify some good memories that we've had? But do we even understand what a memory is? To get us started, like any self-respecting scientist, we're going to start with an experiment, okay? And so I'm going to show you all a video, and what I need you to do is to watch it carefully. You'll be asked to answer a couple of questions later, okay? And we can show it, 2 times, and I'm going to start showing you the video now. Well, let's see if it plays. Okay. Everyone remembers that video, right? All right. Should I do it once more, Siddharth? Maybe?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, cool. I'm going to do it once more. You now have a little bit of idea of what's going on. Look carefully at the video, and we're going to go over some questions. You're going to answer some questions later. All right. I think Siddharth's going to send out questions, right?
Yes. Yes, I have questions over
Do I have
here.
to stop sharing?
Yeah, I will take over the screen share.
Perfect.
Okay, so I want all of you to go to this website called menti.com. Okay. And you can either, if you have a phone nearby, scan this QR code or go to menti.com and put in that code. So since there are people both here and on YouTube, this is an easy way to gather your feedback. So I'll just give you a minute. Go to menti.com and use that code 54809637. So I will and 54809637. Okay. So keep that tab open or keep that browser window open because we're going to keep asking you questions on this through the course, okay, through the course of the session. Okay. So menti.com and 54809637. Okay. If you're ready, here's the first question. Here is the first question. Oh, there. Here's the first question. What color was the car that came from the right? So type out your answers. What color was the car that came from the right? Okay. We're hiding your responses until you've typed it out. So remember, this is a test of your memory. Okay. Well, once we hit about 65 responses, I will show you the answers. Okay, what color was the car that came from the right? Okay, here are the answers. A lot of people are saying black, white, gray. Gray. Okay. Cool. Some people are ready. That's good to hear. But it looks like white and gray is the biggest votes over here. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay. So again, if you've not found this yet, go to menti.com and use the but the code that's on top, 54809637, and you'll get to be a part of this. So here's your next slide. Did somebody get hurt or fall out of the car? Yes or no? Did somebody get hurt or fall out of the car? Did somebody get hurt or fall out of the car? Okay, most people have responded, so let's see what it is. No. Okay, most everyone says that no, nobody fell out of the car. Cool. Back to you, Krithika. I don't know
All
the
right,
answer.
awesome.
Tell them.
Well, you saw the video, didn't you?
This is not testing my memory, it's testing theirs.
All right, so we'll come back to this in a bit. I'm going to continue. I'm going to start my my lesson on vision and memory. Okay. All right. So today we're going to talk about. One sec. I have my controls here. I'm trying to minimize it. All right. So today we're going to talk about the hippocampus and memory. The hippocampus is a brain structure that we're going to know a lot about by the end of today's session. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we form memories. So when something first happens, how does it become a memory? How do we store it? And then at a later point of time, how do you say, hey, I remember this happened? How do we recall our memories? And maybe if we get to it, we're going to talk about some of the discoveries that scientists have made about the brain's actual code for memory itself. Okay? All right. So one of the biggest things that we've actually found out about the brain's memory system is from this human patient known as HM. Okay, he's this extremely famous patient, and he had his hippocampus, parts of his brain that were surgically removed because he had an illness called epilepsy. And at that point of time, this was in the 1950s, the way they would treat epilepsy is basically by removing small parts of the brain to make sure that brain activity doesn't increase forever and ever. And actually, when you do this, when parts of the hippocampus are removed, the person does not have epilepsy anymore. So I don't know, you might have heard of epilepsy in the context, it's also called fits, where a person just starts shaking uncontrollably because of uncontrollable neural activity. It's very common in children, in like infants, I mean, and over time this reduces, but sometimes you also have it as adults, and it's very hard to know where it comes from in the brain. And so 50 years ago, or like 50, 70 years ago, the way they used to do it is by removing small parts of the brain and seeing if that helped. And many times it did help. But you know what happens when you go around rooting and removing small parts of the brain? You have unintended consequences, okay? And so what this person could not form any new episodic memories at all. And so anything that happened to him he couldn't know. And so he would meet somebody, and then 5 seconds or 2 minutes later, he'd be like, who are you? I don't think we've met. Isn't that crazy? But other parts of his memory remained intact. You know, he could ride a bike. He learned how to ride a bike when he was 5, and he always remembered how to ride a bike. And from this person's surgery is how we know that the hippocampus, this brain structure, is required for memory. You know, okay, so now we're going to look at a YouTube video about HM and his contributions to science.
You need to unmute the audio. On YouTube, it's
yes,
muted there.
I think I did that for the previous one.
On September 1st,
Yeah?
1953.
Yeah, good.
Okay, I'm just going to start again.
On September 1st, 1953, William Scoville used a hand crank and a cheap drill saw to bore into a young man's skull, cutting away vital pieces of his brain and sucking them out through a metal tube. But this wasn't a scene from a horror film or a gruesome police report. Dr. Scoville was one of the most renowned neurosurgeons of his time, and the young man was Henry Molaison, the famous patient known as HM, whose case provided amazing insights into how our brains work. As a boy, Henry had cracked his skull in an accident and soon began having seizures, blacking out, and losing control of bodily functions. After enduring years of frequent episodes and even dropping out of high school, the desperate young man had turned to Dr. Scoville, a daredevil known for risky surgeries. Partial lobotomies had been used for decades to treat mental patients, based on the notion that mental functions were strictly localized to corresponding brain areas. Having successfully used them to reduce seizures in psychotics, Scoville decided to remove HM's hippocampus, a part of the limbic system that was associated with emotion, but whose function was unknown. At first glance, the operation had succeeded. HM's seizures virtually disappeared, with no change in personality, and his IQ even improved. But there was one problem. His memory was shot. Besides losing most of his memories from the previous decade, HM was unable to form new ones, forgetting what day it was, repeating comments, and even eating multiple meals in a row. When Scoville informed another expert, Wilder Penfield, of the results, he sent a PhD student named Brenda Milner to study HM at his parents' home, where he now spent his days doing odd chores and watching classic movies for the first time, over and over. What she discovered through a series of tests and interviews didn't just contribute greatly to the study of memory, it redefined what memory even meant. One of Milner's findings shed light on the obvious fact that although HM couldn't form new memories, he still retained information long enough from moment to moment to finish a sentence or find the bathroom. When Milner gave him a random number, he managed to remember it for 15 minutes by repeating it to himself constantly. But only 5 minutes later, he forgot the test had even taken place. Neuroscientists had thought of memory as monolithic, all of it essentially the same, and stored throughout the brain. Milner's results were not only the first clue for the now familiar distinction between short-term and long-term memory, but showed that each uses different brain regions. We now know that memory formation involves several steps. After immediate sensory data is temporarily transcribed by neurons in the cortex, it travels to the hippocampus, where special proteins work to strengthen the cortical synaptic connections. If the experience was strong enough, or we recall it periodically in the first few days, the hippocampus then transfers the memory back to the cortex for permanent storage. HM's mind could form the initial impressions, but without a hippocampus to perform this memory consolidation, they eroded like messages scrawled in sand. But this was not the only memory distinction Milner found. In a now famous experiment, she asked HM to trace a third star in the narrow space between the outlines of two concentric ones, while he could only see his paper and pencil through a mirror. Like anyone else performing such an awkward task for the first time, he did horribly. But surprisingly, he improved over repeated trials, even though he had no memory of previous attempts. His unconscious motor centers remembered what the conscious mind had forgotten. What Milner had discovered was that the declarative memory of names, dates, and facts is different from the procedural memory of riding a bicycle or signing your name. And we now know that procedural memory relies more on the basal ganglia and cerebellum, structures that were intact in HM's brain. This distinction between knowing that and knowing how has underpinned all memory research since. HM died at the age of 82 after a mostly peaceful life in a nursing home. Over the years, he had been examined by more than 100 neuroscientists, making his the most studied mind in history. Upon his death, his brain was preserved and scanned before being cut into over 2,000 individual slices and photographed to form a digital map down to the level of individual neurons, all in a live broadcast watched by 400,000 people. Though HM spent most of his life forgetting things, he and his contributions to our understanding of memory will be remembered for generations to come.
Okay.
Are we going to stop for questions, or you'll manage questions?
You can tell us when you want to
Because I
open for
see,
questions, and at that point we can
okay,
open chat for questions if you
I
like.
see a couple raised hands, so,
Sure, if you want to take questions now, we can
all
do
right.
that.
Any questions, guys?
Would you just like to reinforce what was
Sure.
said?
Yeah, sure.
Let's go to
This
the
is just a little slide that just summarizes a little bit of what we saw. And so we have a debt of gratitude that we have from human patients like HM, where we learn about because of various things that happen to them, because they're sick and they give their time to research. We learn a lot about the human brain. And patient HM is the MVP for us understanding about memory. So that's a picture of him on the left in the top row. In the middle row here, you see an MRI scan of HM, which actually shows you the brain itself. And you can see where the yellow circles are. That's the part of the brain, the hippocampus, that was actually removed to help him with his epilepsy. And on the very right, you see the brain slices that are now preserved in a museum at the University of California in San Diego. And I actually I hope to go there and actually go and see these brain slices in person. And at the bottom is a picture of Brenda Milner, the scientist who actually worked with patient HM for almost starting from her PhD to the end of her research career. All right, I am ready to take questions. I see a couple raised hands.
Yeah. HM could retain information for 15 minutes, but not any longer.
Mm-hmm.
That was the question.
Oh, could he retain for 15? I think it was I think less than 15 minutes. I think it was a few minutes usually. And researchers who had to work with him for hours and hours doing tests with him would actually have to constantly reintroduce themselves and be like, you are patient HM, you have come here to do memory research, but it was about a few minutes. And the understanding was that he couldn't make any new memories. So the hippocampus is important, necessary, required for making new memories and new experiences. But if he made memories before his surgery, he remembered all of that.
There's also a question of what parts of the brain store memory.
Perfect. We'll get to that in a second.
Okay. And what exactly is episodic memory?
Okay, cool. Those are all perfect questions for me to segue to my next slide. Okay. Sorry, I feel like my computer is glitching a little bit.
Yeah, you suddenly jumped a bunch.
Yeah, I know. Okay. Okay, so from patient HM, the biggest lesson that we learned was that there are different kinds of memory, right? And so memory systems are basically, there are two big kinds of memories. One is called explicit memory, which I've shown here on the left, and another is implicit memory. Explicit memory or declarative memory are of two kinds, okay? One is semantic memory, which is facts about the world, right? What is the capital? What is the capital of India, right? What is the capital of Karnataka? All that are facts about the world. That is semantic memory, okay? That you learn knowledge about the world, that you slowly learn, basically kind of what you learn in school. The second kind of explicit memory is episodic memory. And these are events that actually happen to you as a person and do not happen to anybody else. So the way people think of episodic memory is it has three things: what, where, and when. Okay, what happened, When did it happen and where did it happen? Okay, so if I had ice cream at an ice cream shop near my house, that is an episodic memory that only happened to me and not to my friend. Okay, so those are two kinds of explicit or declarative memory, and that is mediated by the medial temporal lobe, and we'll talk about that a little bit. The second kind of memory is implicit memory, and these and examples of this are like, you know how to ride a bike, or you know how to play the violin. You can almost do it without even thinking about it. Okay, when you learned, it was hard and you had to think about it a lot. Over time, it became very natural. And that's why, that's why the phrase even exists. It's like riding a bike. It's very simple. You don't have to think about it. That is called procedural memory. And that's a kind of implicit memory. Another kind of implicit memory is being scared, is an emotional memory, is being scared of your snakes and rats and cockroaches. And these are innate fears that we have about predators in the world. So those are basically the two big, memory systems. And we're going to see if we can understand this a little more. And so that's going to help us with that. I'm going to put this up in a little bigger font here. So we have some questions.
Right. So let's go to the questions that we had. So which of these kinds of memory is this statement? We're going to show you 4 statements and you need to choose which of these kinds of memory is this statement. So remember what Krithika just told us.
They can see the slide.
You can see the slide, yeah.
Okay, cool, perfect.
I think they should be able to see your slide as well. In fact,
Yeah, I don't want them to
I can stop my
remember.
sharing and you just look at Krithika's slide, and on Mentimeter where you are, the question is, the statement is that Narendra Modi is the Prime Minister of India. Which of these forms of memory is it? Okay, we've got about 60% responses. So we'll just, okay. 88% of you are saying that this is explicit semantic memory. So the leftmost category. And 7% of people are saying it's episodic memory. Okay, so now let's move to the next statement. The next statement is, I am scared of a spider. Which kind of memory is this? Oh, oops. Apologies. So, I am scared of a spider. Which kind of memory is this? And 83% of you say it's implicit emotional. 13% of you say that it's episodic memory. Krithika, your thoughts? Or thoughts later?
We can actually, I think this will segue to the next part perfectly, actually.
Okay, so should I go to the next question, or you want to?
Yes, go to the next question.
Go to the next question. So, my 13th birthday was a disaster for both me and my parents. I don't remember my 13th birthday at all, but that's probably a me problem. I think Krithika perfectly remembers. So, my 13th birthday was a disaster for both me and my parents. What kind of memory is this? Okay, and in this, we see that 89% of people say that this is explicit episodic memory. So it's the thing where the two people are dancing. That one. Okay, cool. And then the final question is the memory of how to tie a shoelace. I hope all of you know how to tie your shoelace. And therefore, what kind of memory is that in your head? Okay. So a couple of people are asking what is declarative memory. So declarative, non-declarative, you can see on the screen. And I let Krithika say more.
Yes. So declarative memory is, first of all, the words are not important.
Yes.
Apart from, having to communicate about these concepts. Declarative memory is explicit memory, and semantic and episodic memory form declarative memory. That's all. And it's also called explicit memory, and it's mediated by different parts of the brain as compared to implicit memory.
Super. So everyone's saying that this is procedural. So implicit.
Nice.
90% of people. So
wonderful. I think we have a room of experts, really. Like people, I think you guys are ready. You guys are ready to go do memory research. And I think we can just like promote all of you.
You just need you need the mango juice.
Yeah, exactly. All right. And I think that some of the answers actually really touch upon questions that are still unresolved in research today, and as many of you guys sort of thought that some of these memories can be hybrid, right? You can have a memory that's both episodic and semantic, like how knowing that Narendra Modi is the Prime Minister of India, that is a fact, but you could have learned it in school or or at home from your parents or from the newspaper or by just from people, right? So that is a part of your experience, and so it can be a part of your episodic memory, but it's also a semantic memory. And so I think we have two more questions just to I think generally solicit examples of hybrid memories.
Yeah. Now on Menti, can you think of an example of a memory that's both episodic and semantic? So that means that it's both an experience that happened to you and a fact. Okay. So far, only like 20% of people have responded. So think of a memory of yours that is both episodic and semantic, something that's both something that happened to you and I'm going to actually move to sharing my screen so that you can start seeing the kinds of responses that people are giving. That COVID-19 happened. Learning in school. I live in Qatar. Riding a bike is as easy as eating cake.
I think that's a true sentence, but I don't think it's I do not think it is either semantic or episodic, but I do appreciate that is an experience that That is an two episodic experiences that they are comparing.
What about this one? You will get hurt if you go at high speeds and onto a speed bump when cycling.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. I can't tell if they were just told this by a parent, but it is a true thing.
Yeah, these ones are good, right? Taj Mahal was built by Shah Jahan, but I remember the tour guide telling me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's like unambiguously semantic and episodic.
Yes. I don't see how World War II is episodic memory for anyone over here. But just clarify.
But kudos on the World War facts.
Okay, cool. Shall we move to the next
All
question?
right, we can, yeah, so just say the next question, we'll solicit answers and I'll keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. So can
Sort
you
of
think of an example of a memory that's both emotional and procedural? Something that's emotionally connected and like riding a bike kind of stuff. So with that, I will turn over to Krithika. I'll stop my screen share.
All right. Okay, so if you guys have any questions so far, now is a good time to bring them up and we can chat.
Right. So there are a bunch. So there are some about HM. So maybe we'll get to those first. Did he
Okay.
written memory and not visual memory? And what does it mean by he didn't have new episodic memory?
Okay, so he could read and write, right? So if you asked him to write about like facts about the world, he's like, who is the president? Or if you asked him to do that, he could write. If you asked him 2 minutes later, do you remember writing about the president of the United States? He'd be like, what are you talking about? I do not remember that. So anything that newly happened to him, he didn't know, but he was capable of doing actions like the procedural actions, you're reading and you're writing, which is very automatic for us, but he didn't remember them. He didn't like process them and hold on to them over time, basically. That was really the problem. And so he would actually have actually, I don't know, there's like a movie about this. It's called Memento, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, where it's a good movie, you should go see it. Where this person cannot make new memories, and they have little hints throughout their day. There are lots of people like this, and they have hints that they have little post-it notes that say, I am Krithika, I am HM. I don't have a hippocampus, I can't make new memories, so that they can keep jogging their memory. So they just have a scratch pad written down so that they can look at it whenever they're confused.
So there are a bunch of questions about amnesia. So when you have amnesia, when you lose those memories, because there are lots of movies about it.
Yes.
Right? What are those memories that are lost?
Yeah, okay. So basically so this is a kind of amnesia, right? HM had a kind of amnesia. And I think I don't know the exact words, but there's something called retrograde amnesia and there's called antrograde amnesia. So one is where basically you remember everything that happened before your surgery, kind of like what HM had. So he remembered how to ride a bike. He remembered who the president was before the surgery, but he couldn't make any new memories. Okay. And then there are some kinds of memories where after surgery, you cannot make anything for a small period of time, and then you can start remembering things. In addition to all of those, so these are because of events that happen to you, like surgery, or you're sick and something happened. But there are also like age-related loss of memories, right? And so that is just like general age-related amnesia. So that's a part of like dementia or Alzheimer's, sort of relates to forgetting. I don't think we understand exactly what kinds of memories are lost, and that's kind of an active area of research that even today people are asking. And unfortunately, most of the research is kind of done in animal models and translating them to human models and understanding what kinds of memories are lost is still like an active area of research.
Cool. And then others are asking, do other animals have the hippocampus? Does it do the same thing?
Fantastic. We're going to get to that in a second.
Okay, cool. I'm just what is photographic memory, since we've been talking so much?
Yeah. So this is a concept that people know. It's a very popular concept, and also I think a part of lots of like TV shows and sci-fi things where it's purported that people can just read a book or read something and just remember exactly what happened. It's like taking a photograph of a thing and you always have it. I don't think it's an actually true phenomenon. I don't think it has been studied in great detail. A lot of it is from humans who will often overemphasize their own abilities. And usually it comes from that. There are people who can definitely remember a lot more than others. And I think memory capacity, memory capability widely varies across individuals. And there are different reasons for that, starting from genetic to like environmental reasons. But I don't think we have complete evidence of photographic memory just yet.
Cool. I think with that, I'll let you continue
Yeah.
and I'll track of further questions.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Thanks for that. All right. So here, finally, now we're going to go from understanding, what it feels like to lose memories and have memories to the brain structures that actually support memory. And these are brain structures that support long-term declarative memory. Okay, that is episodic and semantic memory. And so the structures sort of in the middle of the brain, in the middle of the human brain, are the hippocampus and amygdala and the rhinal cortex. Okay, that's sort of pictured over here. And to answer somebody's question in the audience, the hippocampus is present in all species. It's conserved across species. And here is the hippocampus. It's a slice of the brain where you can see the hippocampus. And the top is the mouse brain. Middle is the ferret brain, and bottom is the human brain. First of all, it's kind of hard to miss how big the human brain is compared to the ferret and the mouse brain. The second thing is the hippocampus is actually marked in these pictures. In the top picture, in the mouse brain, you can see that the hippocampus one is at the top of the brain, and it's kind of a relatively large portion of the brain itself. But if you go to the human brain, the hippocampus is kind of all the way to the bottom and the center of the brain, and there's all this extra brain that's called cortex that developed after the mouse brain in evolution. And so relatively compared to the mouse, we have, much less of a hippocampus than the mouse brain itself. And it's generally thought that the hippocampus performs similar functions in all species. And we'll kind of touch upon what exactly it does and what we understand in terms of details of how memories are made. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how exactly a memory is formed, right? Till now we were like, yeah, so once we experience something, we remember it, right? How do you remember it? You're going to go back today and tell somebody that you attended a class on memory. How did you make that memory, right? So forming an episodic memory, forming a declarative memory usually involves 3 steps, okay? First, on the very left, you encode the memory. Okay, you encode the memory trace. And second, you consolidate it for long-term storage. And finally, you retrieve it. These are kind of the 3 steps. So encoding, consolidation, and retrieval. So sleep is actually a very important role in memory formation. So if your parents are giving you a tough time that you're sleeping too much, just tell them you need it for your memories, okay? And so in a nutshell, a memory is learned when you're awake and consolidated when you're asleep. And then when you wake up the next day, you're able to retrieve it. So let's go through an example over here, okay? So if you, for example, here, you meet your friend Jane at the beach. Okay, and she shows off her new red car. And so areas in the cortex, it's sort of above the brain that we saw in the previous picture, sort of above the hippocampus, at the top of the brain, all of them process this information. Okay, and so there is the car, there's the color red, there's Jane, who's your friend, at the beach, so they're like palm trees, and all of these are together, associated together, and put in the hippocampus. Okay, and now the hippocampus acts as what's called a hub that binds the information about all these four things into this episodic representation. Now, hippocampus does not actually hold the information. It just says, okay, car, red, Jane, and tree are all connected, and it connects to the hippocampus. Okay. Now, when you go to sleep, right, you go to sleep in the middle, it's nighttime, you're consolidating. So now the hippocampus actually replaced this memory and allowing the sort of slow learning and connections and making this memory independent of the hippocampus. So now the representation actually over days will actually move out of the hippocampus itself. And this sort of systems, it's called consolidation of the process, and it is formed by strengthening of the connections in the cortex. Okay. Now, once the memory is actually shifted to the cortex, you don't need the hippocampus anymore to actually retrieve the memory because it has been moved. It has been moved to the cortex over days and days of what is called consolidation. So this kind of explains why HM couldn't make any new memories, because the hippocampus is involved in binding the things that happen simultaneously, your what, where, and when, into one event that then gets moved to another part of the brain, which is the cortex, right? And so he couldn't make any new memories because he didn't have the hippocampus, but any old memories actually don't live in the hippocampus. So they're actually stored in a different part of the brain, which is different parts of the cortex. Your visual memories are stored in the visual part of the cortex. Your auditory memories are stored in the auditory part of the cortex. So this local storage of memories has nothing to do with actually forming the memory itself. Okay, I think we're ready for our final memory test, Siddharth. You're muted.
I am sharing a link in the chat. It is a Google form. So you'll have to open it. I am doing the right memory test, right, Krithika? Just confirming.
Yes.
Yeah. So you all remember the video that you saw at the start, right? We need you to go ahead and fill out that form. It's very simple. It's just 4 or 5 questions, right? Go ahead and fill out this form, and let's see how much you remember of that that video of the car crash. So go ahead, fill out the form, and let's see what you all say. In case you have any troubles opening that Google form link. And please keep sending in your questions. I'm keeping track of them, and we'll share them with you. We'll run them with Krithika in a while. Okay. So please do fill out the form. That's great. We've already got 38 people. Okay. So we've crossed 60 responses, Krithika. I don't know if you want to move
I
on or
think that's good.
you want to move on?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I think they'll keep coming in, right?
Yeah.
So I can maybe talk about the study and then we can share the results. How about that?
Oh, no. So then maybe while we're waiting,
Okay.
there have been other questions
Okay,
that
perfect.
might be interesting to ask. So, why can't we remember what we did when we're babies?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, actually. Um, so one of the big things that happens during development, when as soon as we're born and then we have, we grow, one of the big things that happens is there is something called pruning, okay? And so we lose a lot of the neurons that we're born with, okay? And so it's thought that that is one of the reasons that you don't really remember memories from like 1 to 3 years old. It's kind of interesting to actually go and think about what your earliest memory is. And I've done this with many people, and some people can remember some things from when they're 2 years old, but it's usually 3.5 is their first memory that they can remember. A lot of it is also very unreliable because there's lots of there's sort of photos that kids will see and actually remember and insert a memory that they actually didn't experience, but because it's something that their parents told them about. So one of the reasons that you don't remember memories is because of pruning, and you lose a lot of the neurons. And the idea is that like neurons sort of are known to not regenerate, right? So you don't get new neurons. There's a small part of the brain, actually the hippocampus, where neurogenesis happens, when new neurons are born. But one of the things is that it's actually a very interesting question, right? If each neuron stores a memory, and we're going to get to this exactly how memories are stored. If you lose that neuron, so this is called the grandmother cell hypothesis. Let's imagine that every cell in your brain encodes a concept. Okay, so there's a cell in your brain, there's a neuron in your brain that encodes your grandmother. Okay, and for whatever reason, now this neuron dies. Do you forget your grandmother? Okay, so that's kind of like very inefficient if that actually happened. And so this is sort of like an example to illustrate that it's not possible that each neuron stores one memory. The memory is actually stored as a distributed representation in many, many neurons, so that if one neuron dies, it's okay, nothing happens. And you have to lose many neurons before you actually start seeing deficits in remembering things.
Super, which links very well into the next question, which is why do you lose memory when you're aging and how do you prevent that?
Yeah, how do you prevent that? That's I think a $1 million question. And if you find the answer to that, you'll be a very rich person and science will thank you. Yeah. So Alzheimer's disease is sort of one of the big memory disorders that people talk about. And the reason why people have Alzheimer's is, the actual like symptoms in terms of the cells is accumulation of what are called amyloid plaques. So there are these, molecules that accumulate in the brain, and the more and more you accumulate, it eats more and more of the hippocampus, and they start to lose memories. Okay, and so the main way to treat this has been, okay, very simple, right? Okay, there are these extra molecules that form as a result of aging. Let's go remove them, right? Really simple. Let's go target some drugs, target some medicines to go into the brain and dissolve these amyloid plaques. And so that is the strategy that researchers have been trying. And so how they do this is they actually make models of mice that can't remember, that replicate the same symptoms that you see in Alzheimer's disease. And then they'll go and treat it with various kinds of drugs and try to see, can you melt these amyloid plaques away? And for some, it has worked to some extent, but I don't think we really understand details of how that happens. Why do these plaques form? Where do they form? What kinds of memories are lost? We actually don't know that if you go to like a particular part of the hippocampus, what memories do you lose? And for that, I think we need to actually go and understand the brain when it's not in a diseased form, right? How does the brain go and organize everything that you see? It's going to put it in this little fist-sized ball where it's like today is different from yesterday, is different from tomorrow. And you don't get up one day and you don't think it's yesterday. It's very clear to you that it's today, right? You don't mix your memories. How does this happen? And this is a question that keeps me up at night, and I wonder how it happens, how the brain does it.
Cool. I think maybe we should move ahead to the next piece. Yeah.
I'll talk about the experiments and then you'll tell me results.
Oh, yes, sure. Results are ready.
Okay, do you want to do results first?
Yes, I think the answer is inconclusive.
Okay, perfect. Like any good scientific experiment.
So, we'll just tell you what we did. Okay, so based on whether your birthday was an odd number or an even number, you got asked different questions. Okay, so if your birthday was an odd number, then we told you this. We said you watched a video where two cars smashed into each other. It's disturbing. And we asked questions about how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? Did you see broken glass in the road? What traffic sign did the car ignore? Right? And when you said that, when you answered those questions, you sort of, so for example, here you can see that about almost half the people felt like the car was going above 40 kilometers per hour. Right? However, if you had your birthday on an even number date, and then we asked questions that didn't use such words. We said they collided at the intersection. They just hit each other. Was there broken glass on the road? So the second set of questions, and Krithika, correct me if I'm not explaining it right, the second set of questions were less leading. Okay. And when we did that, well, a lot fewer people felt like the car was going really fast, right? So you can see the purple and blue over here is only about 23%, whereas over here, purple and blue is more like 30%, right? So just by changing the word from smashed to hit made you feel like the car went faster because all of you saw the same video, right? Broken glass is kind of inconclusive. I think the traffic sign, most of you said that you don't remember. Yeah. So I don't think there's
I think we have an effect on speed, right?
Yes, we have
a little bit of an effect on speed.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So the experiments that we just did with you were basically done by this very famous psychologist, Elizabeth Loftus, where she basically showed exactly what you all experience here, is that memory is continually reconsolidated. The memories that you have is not a photograph of what you saw. Every time you recall it, every time you retrieve it, you change it a little bit. And it depends on the question that's being asked. So when subjects see cars colliding and you ask them, oh, these two cars bumped into each other, what do you think happened? What was the speed of the car? As opposed to when you ask them, the two cars really smashed into each other. And so when you tell people that two cars bumped into each other, they think it's just like they're just going at a slow speed. But if you say that they smashed into each other, they will actually say that, oh, they're going at a really fast, really fast, and they collided into each other. And based on these experiences, even though they all saw the exact same video, if you ask them a week later, oh, hey, do you remember, you remember this video that you saw last week? Do you remember seeing any broken glass windows? And the people who actually heard the words crash will say, yeah, no, I definitely saw broken glass, even though there was no broken glass in the videos. And this actually kind of shows us or tells us that memories are quite fragile, and what we think we remember to like this great degree of detail that we think forms a part of ourselves might not actually reflect reality, but it's actually a processed version depending on the questions you're asked and depending upon the context that you are in. And so when you think that something happened to you and you recall it, every time you recall it, you're actually changing the content of the memory itself. All right, this actually is like really interesting to think about very philosophically, right? Like, what exactly does it mean? What does it mean to have a self? And if you think you are your memories, but your memories are not an actual representation of reality, who are you? I'm going to leave you guys to think about that and sort of continue telling you guys about what we understand about how memories are stored. All right. So one of the hypotheses that to understand how memory, so we learned a little bit about how memories are formed, right? There's this consolidation that happens. The hippocampus acts as an associative hub that links all the parts of an episode and puts them all together and then transfers them to another part of the brain, the cortex, to remember it for the rest of your life. But how is it actually stored? Where is the memory, right? And so memory is actually stored in the connections between the neurons. So the synapse, that's the connection. So there's a red neuron here and you have a blue neuron. This portion that connects the red and the blue is the synapse, and this is the fundamental unit of memory. And the stronger the synapse, the stronger your memory is. So if you have two neurons, okay, one neuron can synapse onto another, and the other neuron can synapse into the other. So you have two synapses. Okay, so if you have n neurons, if you have 3 neurons, you have each neuron can synapse with every other neuron except itself. So it's n into n minus 1 synapses. So 3 neurons is 3 neurons into two neurons. It can connect, each neuron can connect to 2 other neurons, and so that's 6 synapses. 5 neurons, if you have 5 neurons, you can have 20 synapses. And you quickly see the more number of neurons that you add, I bet this whole class is going to do this amazing mental math. If you have 100 billion neurons, how many synapses do you have? And it turns out that the number of synapses that you have is actually greater than the number of atoms in the universe. So synapses can actually store enormous amounts of information. The capacity that we have is actually like exponential and infinite. Of course, all synapses are not connected to each other. Only a small subset of synapses are actually connected to each other. And so now we're actually going to go and talk about how does the brain know which synapses to strengthen and which synapses to weaken to enable you to remember something versus forget something. Okay, so the model for memory is called Hebbian learning. Okay, so imagine your brain as this like vast network of neurons, and these neurons communicate by sending signals to each other. And this is sent through the synapses, right? Now, when you experience something repeatedly, like studying for a biology test, certain groups of neurons that, fire together. This happens because your brain recognizes some kind of a pattern that's related to the stimulus, like identifying the cell organelles, right? Over time, these neurons that all identify your endoplasmic reticulum, your mitochondria, your nucleus, they all form stronger and stronger connection of pathways between them. It's like they become buddies who chat with each other. So as this neural pathway becomes stronger and you learn it repeatedly with repetition, you can recall the information more easily. Okay, for instance, when upon you've studied really well, labeling all these cell organelles becomes, second nature to you because the neural pathways involved have become very well established. And so the neurons that fire together actually wire together when matching pictures and labels are effectively sort of wired together. And so this is sort of like an easy way to remember is that neurons that fire together wire together. If the neurons, so that's why when you experience something, all the neurons that fire together become connected, and that's what becomes a part of the memory. Okay, now the other part of the understanding of how memories are stored is actually a very important part, and that's forgetting. Okay, and how does this happen? So now the code for this is neurons that fire out of sync lose their link. So when neurons stop firing together consistently over time, their connections actually weaken. Think of it like, practicing a song for like a talent show or something, right? At first you memorize the lyrics, but as time goes by, you no longer practice. The show is over, you're done practicing. The neural pathways that are associated with the song weaken. And you might not forget the song entirely, you don't remember it as well. And you might need some hints or a quick look at the lyrics to remember it completely. And so the firing activity, the activity of neurons, the co-activity of neurons, of how much they fire together, is what determines how strong the memory is going to be. Okay, and so there are actually like models, like mathematical models that'll actually can simulate this in networks that are called Hopfield networks. The names don't matter, but basically what these networks do is you can give them a very noisy cue. Like for instance, if you remember seeing a bird in a tree, okay, and then later when you're trying to remember it, you remember like a part of the feather or part of the branch, and your brain can instantly recreate the memory of that bird. And so these are called a pattern completion, where a small input, a small unclear, noisy input that's given to the network can actually recreate the entire picture of a bird. So here is a noisy picture that was actually given to this model, and using principles from the brain, Hebbian learning principles that we think the brain uses, you can actually recreate this entire, recreate the original picture that the model saw. In fact, I'm sure all of you have heard of ChatGPT, which has sort of taken the world by storm. And ChatGPT is really like a very, very sophisticated, massive autocomplete network, right? You give it a little and it finishes the thought. Okay, and this is because it has memories that are actually stored in a fashion that's somewhat similar to the brain. And when you put these in models, you get this kind of astonishing behavior that's very impressive to see. All right, that brings us to a question for the audience.
Was it one of the questions I have?
Yes,
Ah,
so maybe the last one.
yes. So if you're on Mentimeter, how much energy does the human brain use? And I'm going to share the options. Right, so how much energy do you think the human brain uses? Instructions on how to answer this question are up on the top. Okay. So remember, an incandescent light bulb is the older style of light bulbs, not bells or LEDs. The ones that make things hot is an incandescent light bulb. And I think the rest of the words are quite clear. Okay. How much energy does the human brain use? Just pick one of the options. Cool. I think we've got a decent number of people responding. So we'll just see what the answers are. Oh, wow. A lot of people feel like the brain uses a lot of power. And 19% say 60 watts, 15% say 20 watts. 2% of people say it's like a smartphone. Krithika, what's the answer?
The answer, can you see my slides?
No, you'll have to restart.
Okay, cool. Okay, now you can see my slides now.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, these were your options. And yeah, it does seem like the brain is so powerful. It does actually way more than what ChatGPT can do, but it feels like, oh, okay, yeah, that's about right. Like if ChatGPT uses that much power and we're recreating something brain-like, it makes sense to use that much energy. But actually, the brain just uses 60 watts of energy, which is crazy and wild, right? Like to run ChatGPT, right? You need data centers that are massively powered all day, every day, and then you're going to get like one sentence and it's going to finish one word of the sentence that you basically wrote, and it's going to give you the next word. We did this in school. All of you did this in school when you were 5, okay? And it was all powered by this little brain, much littler when you were small. And the amount of energy that it uses is like vastly smaller. And in creating artificial systems that actually emulate the brain, that actually do what the brain does, one of the things that we have to think about is, how is the brain so efficient, right? Why does it consume such little energy? And while we're definitely not close to creating an artificial system that operates at the same energy efficiency, we're not even matching the intelligence level of humans. And that just tells us how little of the brain that we actually understand, that we cannot create something that is similar to us. And we're getting awfully close, and maybe many of you will be involved in this quest to actually understand the brain. And I think there are many ways to go about it. You go studying natural brains, or you go creating artificial brains, and they're kind of the same thing, really. But yeah, it's something to keep in mind and think about how much the brain can achieve while operating on such little energy. Okay, I think we are close to.
Yeah, we're close to time.
But that's
Very far
okay.
away from completing your slides.
Yeah, that's fine.
And have a huge backlog of questions.
So maybe I'll stop here. I'll take questions, and then we can call it.
So I just had one thought. So since there was so much interest in this session, we asked Krithika if she'd be open to doing a workshop, right? A deeper dive workshop in August, and she said yes. And so I think some of your other slides are probably a teaser of what you'll be covering there, because that would be more related to vision and kinds of research that you do. So I was wondering if you wanted to give us a short teaser about the kinds of stuff that you do, such that if people want to learn more, then they can come to that session in August.
Okay, yeah, no, that sounds good. So actually, what I study is, I study, it might come as a shock to many of you, I study memory. That's why I kind of know a lot about it. All right, so I'll tell you two things, and then I'm going to show you one video, because videos are always fun. And then we'll finish, okay? So most of the things, so we learned a lot about the hippocampus, right? All of you are hippocampus experts now. And so what we know actually about the hippocampus, a lot of it comes from studying mice, okay? And what they do is actually put electrodes in the brains of mice, and they make them run around, okay? And they record as these mice are running around. And so one of the biggest discoveries that came out from this is what are called place cells, okay? And so the mouse brain is excellent at spatial navigation. So the hippocampus in the mouse brain actually encodes where you are in the world. Okay, so here, okay, in the square represents the room that the mouse is in. The lines that you see, the gray lines that you see, are just like the trajectories of the mouse. The mouse is running around the room. Wherever it runs around, you put a line, etc. Okay, so the mouse is clearly going around the entire room, getting reward, and just running around. He's doing nothing else, right? In red, what you see is where a particular neuron in the brain fired, okay? And so this neuron has a place field. So this is this every time you put a mouse in this location, the cell is going to fire. It just basically tells you it is the bottom left corner cell. That's it. And you have cells that represent the top right corner, the top left corner. Every location in space is being represented by cells. In fact, these cells, okay, it's called place cells, and other cells that actually represent the space itself, the room that you're in, actually received the Nobel Prize not so long ago, like 10 years ago in 2014, and it's called actually the GPS of the brain, right? It actually tells you where you are, like how you're sitting in a car and tells you, Google Maps tells you where to go. That's the GPS for you. And in the brain, it lives in the hippocampus and the mouse. But you know what? I told you all about this, like I told you about patient HM. I told you about episodic memory. I told you about, your whole self depends upon your memories and that these memories can be fragile. And that's also sort of mediated by the hippocampus. What's going on? Is it memory or is it space? Is it spatial navigation? Is it GPS or is it memory? And we kind of don't know. And that's kind of what I'm studying. What exactly is the human hippocampus doing? What exactly is the hippocampus doing in other organisms? Is there something that unifies the hippocampus across all these species? That's my quest. And to do this, I study monkeys. Monkeys are very close to us. Their visual system is very similar to humans, but mouse visual system is actually very different. They don't see at all. They are really good at navigating. They're really good at navigating in the dark and hiding from predators. And so maybe the hippocampus is actually a specialist for whatever the organism is doing in its natural environment. If you are good at navigation, it's going to keep your place memories. If you're good at vision, it's going to keep your visual memories. And to actually study this, I combine both spatial navigation and vision into one task to see how we make memories. And so what I do is actually, I get monkeys to play video games. When you have to make a monkey play video games, you have to play a lot of video games yourself. That is really what I do. I play a lot of video games, and then I say, it's for my research. This is a part of my job. So I'm going to show you a video of one of my monkeys doing this task, okay? And what the monkey is supposed to do is really simple. So in the right bottom corner, you can see a monkey. He has a joystick, he's moving, and he is shown a face, and he's allowed to navigate in a room to go find this face. Okay, so the face is in the middle. You'll see the face, he'll go navigate, and the blue dot that you see is where he's looking. Okay, and he's really good at this task. You'll see. So this face, he has to go find it. And I put him in a VR environment, and he goes, looks, he's like, not this face. Oh yeah, that's it. Bam, found it. And then he does many, many, many trials. And each trial is like 10 to 20 seconds long. And we basically teach him to make memories, i.e., remember the faces that he saw and go and look for them while navigating in an environment. And this is kind of similar to how humans remember things, right? We say, oh, hey, you know what? My friend is in class 9B. I'm going to go look for her. right? That's kind of what we do. How do we do that? How do we remember faces? How do we remember where they are? And to understand these very basic questions, I am recording from neurons in monkey brains while they're navigating and looking for faces. He even goes back to that room and checks out, and he's like, no, I think it was there, before he finally figures out where it is. There you go. That's it.
Lovely.
I'm happy to take any questions.
Definitely. So I just wanted to quickly share with you upcoming things that are happening, and then we will dive into questions definitely. So, right. So, oops, I've got too many things moving around here. So, if you really like what happened today, in August, Krithika is going to be running a 2-hour, might run over a little bit, workshop on vision and the brain. So the kinds of stuff that she said she researches, you finally get to that part instead of, today's been great. And I think there was so much more in the presentation that that is so cool. And so we'll be getting into those depths. And you can actually, if you're interested in this area, right? Neuroscience is an incredibly interdisciplinary field, right? There are people who go through engineering and get in there. There are people who go through psychology and get in there. And these kinds of fields that are at the interface of so much of human knowledge and are pushing the boundaries of like understanding who we are, it's a lot of fun and it's very, very interesting. So this workshop will be for any of you who are interested. I've put the link in the chat. We also have, so let me go in order. Next week, we're having Vidya Govindan, who's an incredible educator from Chennai, aimed more at younger students, class on algebraic adventures, which should be a lot of fun. We'll be learning about algebra as a way of understanding patterns in the world, not just sort of like letters on a book. And then next, a week later from that, 2 weeks from now, we're having a course on thinking sharper through history, critical thinking, which is being led by Sriram Naganathan, who is an incredible educator, again from Chennai. And this one is going to be focused on, today you learned the very proximate part of memory. But this about how do we think about history and understand it on a bigger scale is the bigger picture of memory that that Sriram will be going into. And I'm also very excited for that. So with that, there are a bunch of questions. And Krithika, if you're okay with staying for another 10 minutes, if we could go.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let me just pull it out. Right. Let me combine a few things together. So I'll combine these two together, about how you were talking about how photographic memory, it's not so much supported by research. So one of the students said that they have a theory about it, that like these sorts of photographic memories come when you go through a traumatic experience. Losing a loved one or someone you care about is lost, then you remember every detail about it. As an suppose something really important happened during that 1 to 3 year age group, or when you're old, right? Are those things also, so is there does a strong emotion make your memory better?
Yes. I think that's the shortest answer. I really do think that there's a lot of research that shows, in fact, a lot of the memory research in rats and mice are actually based on fear responses, and you basically, when you're scared, when you're emotional, your brain remembers it better, because it's very adaptive. It's important for you to remember that because you don't want to experience that again. right? If you go to a particular place, if you're a rat and you get shocked, you do not want to. You want to remember that place exactly. And after one trial, one short exposure, small exposure, they will not do that again. Okay. And similarly for humans too, right? If you experience something that brings you extreme joy, happiness, or sadness, or fear, people do tend to remember that. That's why, or completely important events in your life, like your first concert recital, or graduation day, or your wedding. All these are very important things that you remember a lot of details about. I think photographic memory has been mostly talked about in terms of reading books and seeing something and just like completely committing it to memory. But I think as we've sort of learned, every time you recall the memory, you're changing it a little. Depending on the question you're asked, depending on the context, you're changing it. It's like continuously evolving. So I do think that emotional memories have stronger content and are a little bit closer to reality. I think that's a good hypothesis and has actually been borne out in many studies.
Cool. There is also a question about how are we able to measure the amount of energy used by the brain? Like, does it change based on what we're doing, like taking a test versus watching a movie? And can the brain overheat?
I think the brain can overheat, but I think there's a very, very, very strong set of what is called homeostatic mechanisms that actually make sure that your temperature is maintained in the body. And those are needs that are, there's the first level of needs that need to be met for the body to function. And so if you're overheating, depending on what's doing, your brain can respond by like passing out, by making you seek something that cools you down, just like stop working for a bit. And so there is a lot of this is called homeostatic mechanism, just to maintain balance in the body. I don't know if you know more about this, Siddharth. How do you measure how much energy the brain consumes?
I feel like fMRI would be pretty good at it, right?
Yeah, like measuring blood flow.
Yeah, blood flow.
To areas. Yeah, definitely when you're doing a hard task, like there are definitely parts of your brain that light up. And there's also like tiredness, and then, there's not much blood going at all. And a lot of it is also to do with how much you've eaten and how much like sugar, how much glucose needs your brain. It is the organ that requires the most amount of energy. So most of the food that you eat is actually going to making sure your brain's functioning.
Right, 20% of your oxygen is the standard figure, I think.
Mm-hmm.
20% of the oxygen that you breathe is going to your brain. Muscles are actually less.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So compared to other organs of the body, it is actually metabolically very expensive to run it, but not nearly as expensive as ChatGPT.
So there's another HM related question, which is, so suppose you had your hippocampus removed and you did not know that hot things burn you.
Oh, yeah.
Go and you touch something hot.
So that's a great question, actually.
Huh.
So basically, these hot thing burning, when you touch something hot, you take your hand away. Okay, this is actually doesn't even require the brain, doesn't even require the central nervous system. This is called a reflex, right? It just goes through the spine. It is really, really bad for you if you burn your fingers, right? So the brain, the body, we've evolved a mechanism where it doesn't even need to go. It's the temperature is so important that it's actually not even going to the brain. It just goes through the spine, and then the circuit sort of completes. And so I do think that if you don't have the hippocampus, my prediction would be that you can still, you will still learn not to touch a hot thing. Many times we learn how to not touch a hot thing by touching it once and then not doing it ever again, right? So I think that learning would be, that reflex would be preserved.
Okay. So a lot of people have been asking more about memory, and one, I feel, relevant question for students also is, how does the brain decide what goes into short-term memory versus long-term memory?
I don't know. Is the short answer. I'm trying to think of what we know about this. I think yeah, I think a lot of the things I think repetition is one thing that leads that makes something go from short term to long term. So if you practice doing something every day, a little by little, it's initially in your short-term memory, and over time it gets sort of like consolidated and becomes a part of your long-term memory. So and that is happens by the strengthening of synapses that we talked about. Um, I I think there's this like intermediate kind of time scales of memory where you know something for a couple days, like your whatever you learned in eighth grade for your eighth grade final exam, you kept it for a couple months or couple days, but now you're like, I'm done. I'm in ninth grade now. I don't care about it anymore. And so I don't know how the brain decides to do it. I think this is like very hot, active topic of research, and the time scales at which learning happens and what kinds of learning rules are applied at each of these time scales is sort of like still people are looking into it.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just add a small bit there, which I think a lot of people, and Krithika, feel free to tell me how, like fact check me on this. A lot of people have said that uh, our memory operates a lot on stories. We remember stories really well, right? All of us, I don't know, I haven't read Harry Potter for 15 years, 20 years. I still remember what happens in that story because it's a story. And so back in March, we had a session where one of our mentors, Anusha, did a session on narrative thinking, right? And she's a journalist, but she brought it to, hey, how do you use this to study? How do you use this for exams? And so many people liked it. Like after Kritika's, this has been the most popular, the next most popular masterclass we've had. That Anusha is doing a workshop in July, which I just brought over there. Which is so it's a bunch of practical tools of how do you like you have a bunch of dry facts. And same way that we saw that memory consolidation happen. If you're just trying to remember a date out of nowhere, you won't remember it. But if you add story, you add context, you add the who, what, where, and when, then it sticks together. And that's storytelling.
That's a really good point. Actually, like one of the techniques to improve your memory, or for like random lists and stuff like that, and there are like actually like competitions for their memory championships that actually go on. And one of the popular methods for this is called the method of loci. And this was initially like people in Greece knew about it. They found out about it. And the idea is you basically remember a very familiar, like neighborhood or your home, and then you go around like you have a list of numbers to remember, or you have a list of names to remember, and you just remember it, and at every point you just drop the first thing in your list and make it look like really weird and funny and vivid. Okay, and then you remember it, and then you go next and drop the second one, and then when you remember, you actually walk through this environment in your head, and that's how you get better and better at remembering. So adding elements of surprise, which is sort of a big thing in stories, right? Adding elements of surprise, adding like continuity in space and time is one of the key sort of like scaffolding, like it's the fabric over which like memories are more easily remembered or actually like stored better.
So there's a question of like, is a memory sort of the same way that like a satellite wave gets turned into a picture, the way that we send like transmissions in phones or in wires is something similar, that it's receiving a bunch of information one after the other and then it reconstructs it? or is it just sort of getting everything in one go? Like how's that?
I think that's such a great analogy, and like a metaphor to think about how the brain does it. I do think that there is an aspect of it. It's both. There is an aspect of it that is sequential, because these are like neurons that are connected in a wire, and there is like information latency, right? If this neuron gets it first, this neuron gets it second, it's going to get it later, right? And it has to go in a chain because they're all connected. It has to go through that chain. But neurons are just not connected in this linear chain. They're all connected to each other, and it's kind of really a mess. Once it starts, it's really hard to say where it went first and where it went second. That's not to say that that doesn't matter, but we don't have the tools yet to actually know where the information is, where it comes first. And so one way to think about it is that it's being sent as little packets, okay? And that you're reconstructing over time. You're like, oh, okay. It's like reading a sentence, right? You can read part of a sentence and you think you understand it, and then you read more of it, and then it becomes clearer and clearer. And so there is this aspect of not even memory, just perception that unfolds over time scales. But these time scales are much, much shorter, are like in hundreds of milliseconds and not seconds. Sometimes it's seconds, depending on how clear your picture is. But I think that's a great analogy. And there is a lot of sequential evolution of information. And then this is called like neural dynamics, and it's also a very important piece of the puzzle.
Cool. And I think I'll wrap up with this question because I think Dhanisha, who was asking it, was very curious to know more. Are there programs or websites that keep young students interested in neuroscience research and study? Because she really wants to become a neuroscientist, and she's from Kumarans.
Well, that sounds that's awfully similar to what I ended up doing. I studied in Kumarans. I studied and actually a lot of my curiosity about science was sort of sparked there. And I think that one of the things that I very vividly remember from childhood, and I think this is because I studied a lot with my older sister. She taught me things that she learned in her class. And so when I was in 4th grade, she was in 8th grade, and I was learning about like the atoms, how in physics, right? How structure of the atom. And then they start with the apple pie model, and you learn that in 4th, and then in 5th it becomes something else, and in 8th she was telling me about how each particle is both a wave and a particle, and I was like, they're lying to me. In 4th grade they're saying it's a pudding pie model, but in 8th grade the story has changed. And at that point of time, I didn't understand that science is science. What becomes science, what becomes fact, is an evolving story. Okay. And what we actually think we understand a lot about, we actually understand very little. And so when you're in school, it feels like science is solved. It's in textbooks. Why else would they write it in a textbook? It's done. They've figured it out. You're not needed for this endeavor, for this enterprise. And then you slowly understand that each of those sentences, there's like years of research behind it, like 50 years of research behind it. And then there's some more that has not even made it into the textbooks yet. And so actually after that, going to ICER was kind of perfect, because that's how they treated everything. They're like, everything is, you can question everything, and we don't know the answers to everything. And let's teach you how to figure out the answers, how to do this, how to do it in a scientific way, and ask a question so that anyone does this experiment anywhere in the world, you're going to get the same answer. And if you don't, you're going to know why. And so like some of my teachers in Kumarans in 11th and 12th were actually like PhDs. And I remember my biology teacher waxing eloquent about beetles and toxicology because that's what she did her PhD in. And she would often tell us stories about these beetles and how she actually did research on them, which was, always very inspiring. And I think I was incredibly lucky to have that kind of, learning at Kumarans, and I think it really totally inspired me. I think I actually know a lot of people who've been interested in neuro. I did a lot of my research in at the Indian Institute of Science, and I did it as an undergrad, like as a first year in college. That's when I started. But I think if you reach out to professors at ISC or at NCBS, any of these research institutions, I think they're more than happy to bring high school students during the summer or even during school year. School year is kind of hard to just give you. So the first thing I would do if I was in your position is try to see if I can go work in a research lab or just go spend some time there and see if you like it. And if you enjoy it, if you enjoy thinking about science. And I actually don't know about many programs. People who have asked me, I've suggested gifted, I've suggested Genwise to them. So I don't know. Maybe you know more opportunities.
I mean, I don't know straight up. So I guess a question to you, Krithika. So for example, if folks ask us about math, there's
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
website, enrich.math.org, which is run by the University of Cambridge Math Education Department. And it has great resources for school age kids. And so I would give them that. And of course, I point them to math programs that we are running.
Yes.
But are there websites out there, like outreach programs that you know of that are neuroscience-ish related?
Not that I know of. I think now, especially for high school, I think for school, it's just now I feel like neuroscience is starting to come to undergrad, like level education in the world. It's going to take a little bit more for it to be in India. But I think the way I was introduced to it, or the way I found it even, was just through books, was just through a lot of popular brain related neuro-ish books. And that completely, so one of the first books, or one of the first two books that I read in my first year of undergrad, which kind of sealed what I'm going to do for the next at least now 15 years, was Phantoms in the Brain by Vilenu Ramachandran and Oliver Sacks. And those books are just fantastic. And they talk about case studies, and they talk about the aspect of how to figure out something, which I think is the meat of whether you will like science and you want to be a scientist. And I think we all want to be scientists, right? We all have that curiosity, and we all want to understand ourselves, and so that is a very fundamental, I think, fundamental part of being. But I don't know. I would honestly, I think it's more word of mouth. I would just reach out to labs and, put your best foot forward and hope that they will allow you to spend time. I do know that a lot of labs are very open to having younger people come and spend time and encourage their curiosity and figure out if they like it. So ICER was excellent. I would highly recommend ICER, but that's after, entering college. Right. I can highly recommend it. It worked out.
And definitely stay in touch with us. We want to be
Yes.
getting these sorts of resources out to you. And yeah, so I think with that, I'd like to thank Krithika for, so by the way, everyone, she woke up at 4 in the morning to do this because this webinar started at 6 a.m. her time in California. So big thank you for all the time and effort you put out into making this really amazing and this really educational session for all of us. I mean, everyone feel free to unmute yourself and say thank you. And all of you who joined us today, I hope that we continue to stay in touch and that we continue to learn together, because
Thank you.
curiosity is the most important thing. And
Thank you, ma'am.
watch this
Thank you,
video
ma'am.
again because
Thank you, ma'am.
the last 10 minutes were absolute gold. I mean,
Thank
the
you,
whole-
ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
We'll
Thanks, Siddharth. This was awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing maybe many of y'all again in a couple months.
yes. Right.
Thank you,
Okay.
ma'am. Bye, ma'am.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye. I will be closing the meeting now.
Bye. Bye, ma'am.
Bye
Bye,
bye.
Bye,
sir.
ma'am.
Bye, ma'am. Bye, sir.
Bye bye.